Everybody, Jason Wood here, the VA loan guy, starting with a new episode of Armed and Ready, and have an awesome guest with us today, Rebecca Turley. And we've been having a really good conversation we wanted to bring you guys all into the loop on about her experience in the Navy and her transition and what she's doing now. So Rebecca, thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
All right, thanks. Yeah, it's good to be here.
Awesome. So, so you're actually just transitioning out of the Navy. And so our show, really focuses a lot on like that transition on people that have already done the transition, right? So they've already gone out of the military, they figured out the career, they're doing that stuff. And so I think this is a cool, unique opportunity to get some perspective on someone that is in between those two phases, right? Just finished active duty and transitioning to, what's next. And so I think that's really cool for our listeners to be able to hear what your experience is now, that in-between phase, and get some perspective from you. So if you could maybe just tell our guests a little bit about, your military experience and what was your motivation? Like, why did you decide to go into the military or into the Navy more specifically?
So I was born and raised in Boise, Idaho, and kind of in high school, I decided I wasn't quite motivated to go to college, and both my grandpas were in the Navy, and so it's kind of like a family heritage thing to join, and so I just kind of decided that was the better option for me at that point, to just kind of go and get a better perspective on the world and myself, and just kind of start a career without really having to decide what I wanted to do in life just yet, and of course travel and serve the country. And so I did 6 years in the Navy as a C2 crewman, which is, for those of you who don't know, it's basically a military grade flight attendant. So I transported cargo and personnel to and from aircraft carriers via my aircraft, the C2 Greyhound. And with that, I went through my typical training for about 2 years, and then was stationed here in San Diego, California, and where I've remained in, because it's absolutely beautiful here. So it's been pretty nice to be stationed here. And I've been fortunate to deploy twice in support of 2 carriers, the John C. Stennis and the USS Nimitz. And so with that, I was able to go all around the Asia Pacific and into the Middle East. And so just got out last June, so pretty recently.
Nice. Well, the Navy sure is a cool way to see the world. Was there anything that really memorable, or a place that really stuck out to you from your time in the Navy that you got to see, a foreign place that really just appealed to you, or you liked or disliked for that matter?
Yeah, quite a lot actually. So I never had left the country before my first deployment, actually. And so that was another big reason that I joined, is to travel, because I've always dreamed of traveling the world. And so the Navy was kind of my ticket to do that. And so my first experience overseas was actually Okinawa, Japan. And I loved it. It's to this day one of my favorite spots that I've been to. And I was fortunate enough to be there for 2 months, or kind of based out of there. We did kind of tours around, but for the most part based out of there for 2 months. And it was just a really cool culture shock to be able to see how an entirely different a different world, from Boise, Idaho, to even around the States to Japan. And so that was one of my probably most memorable times, is just eating sushi go around, and they have a coin operated beer vending machine. So just little things like that that are just so interesting and make traveling for me really memorable. But also on that first deployment, we went to Chennai, India, and that's the first time that I saw real third world poverty. And so that was also very eye-opening. And there was even a few funeral progressions going through the streets by our hotel. And so that was just more of a humbling experience to really understand how privileged we are here in America. And so I was like really fortunate to see kind of the whole world on like my first like trip outside of the States during my deployment.
That's really cool. So now that you're out of the Navy, tell us about that transition, like some of that decision to get out. What was kind of motivating that decision, and what was the transition like getting out of the Navy?
So for me, it was kind of more of a personal decision to get out. I loved my job. I still miss my job. I love the physical aspect of it, but it just wasn't, the military wasn't necessarily a good place for my mentality. Just because like it is a lot of negativity in a lot of the military and a lot of like command. And I had, to be frank, like I had a lot of sexist leaders, and so it wasn't a good. It became toxic after a little bit, and I would have had to switch careers entirely in the military in order to stay in. So I knew that I wanted to get out after my first contract, which was 6 years. And so making that decision early really allowed me to set myself up properly. So I bought a home early, and so I have equity in that. I currently have a venture in that.
Awesome.
I was able to pay off all of my debts, and I was able to save. I was able to plan out what I wanted to do. I started going to school while I was in the military. For a period of time, I even got a weekend job bartending just to kind of save extra money. So making the decision early really allowed me to set myself up properly. And so since getting out in June, I left in August for a backpacking trip around the world. So that's been a life goal of mine since I was a little girl. And the military was the reason that I was able to do it, because not only it prepared me with like the worldly experience, but also the financial stability to save for a 7-month trip around the world. So
That's cool.
yeah, I'm very fortunate like for the military and everything it provided for me. So yeah, so I just my transition was more about coming back into myself and like really building a foundation for my mentality and like my personal development, that I can feel confident walking into finishing university, starting a career with the right headspace, if that makes sense. So I've been traveling the globe for 7 months. I started in Europe. I did Indonesia. I got yoga certified in Bali. I traveled around. I bought a car in Australia, and I drove from Perth, all the southern border, up to Fraser Island. And so,
Wow.
yeah, and then I went to Myanmar and Thailand, and then came back in time for the chaos that is.
A nice welcome home, right?
Yeah. So I came back to this reality. So but I'm very fortunate to be back home, and so now my transition is just going to be focused on my schooling to finish my engineering degree, and then starting my career in that.
Awesome. I'm curious to know about your home purchase. For someone who's so young, buying a house is usually not a very common thing at that age.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me a little bit about like what your motivation was. Like, how did you get interested in buying real estate, and obviously using your VA loan? That's my language of love is the VA loan. So how did you get into that? Did you get like some good mentoring advice from someone, family member or someone in the military, or how did that come to be?
I wish I had good mentoring advice, but the truth is that I'm just kind of a jump in kind of a person. And so my ex-boyfriend, when I was 19 and 20, like we actually bought a house together with the VA loan. And so and I kind of let him take the lead on all of that. And then like when we broke up, we sold it. And then I realized like I didn't want to pay rent after paying a mortgage. And so I just decided to do it myself. And so probably should have gotten a mentor. It might have been a little bit smoother, but the whole process was actually pretty easy. And I bought my own home when I was 21. I bought my own condo that I still have now.
That's great.
Yeah, it is. And so the process was really smooth, and besides the massive stack of paperwork that comes with buying any home,
Right.
it was really a seamless transition, because I was able to go right from paying rent to paying a mortgage, and with really like no difference in it.
That's great. Yeah, if you're able to keep that housing expense the same, that's
Hmm.
really, really helpful, because you get those additional benefits from, the mortgage interest deduction, and obviously you're earning equity also.
Yeah. That's
So
the thing I think people don't realize, that it's zero down for most like VA loans. And so with that in mind, like, you don't have to have 40 grand saved up just to buy a home. Like I had, in all honesty, I think I had about $5,000 or $6,000 in my savings account, and I was still able to buy a home. So
yeah.
like people like when I told a bunch of my coworkers about that, like a lot of people just don't realize that you need as little, like that VA loan is such a great opportunity. You need to be as prepared as civilians do most of the time.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I help a lot of people with buying a home with a VA loan, and you don't need a lot of money. I mean, it's super common for people to use their VA loan, especially active duty, and at the end of the transaction, when they close on it, to actually walk away with having no money expended. I mean, there's some things you need to pay for along the way, but you can sometimes get that reimbursed depending on how you have your purchase structured.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, it's not very commonly taught in the military about the VA loan and the benefit. But those that learn about it and take advantage of it while you're in the military, and you have that BAH money, which is
Mhm.
tax-free money for housing, it's a no-brainer, right? I mean, you get money that's tax-free for a place to live.
Mhm.
And then once you own a home, you have that mortgage interest deduction for your taxes.
Mhm.
And then you're also gaining equity in an appreciating asset. Oh, and by the way, you have a roof over your head. So you have all these things that are total wins. And it's surprising to me that it's not catching on more and more, with just the access to information we have now with the internet and stuff. But yeah, it really isn't a big, hairy, scary process
Mhm.
if you're connected with the right people and get it done right. And kudos to you for jumping in early and realizing the advantages to that, because now, I mean, you can start building a real estate portfolio. Next place you move, you can buy something, and you may be able to use your VA loan again. We have several people that have multiple VA loans going on at once. So that's really, really cool.
Mhm. Yeah, it's definitely something that's not talked about enough, I think, and I think more so people with families are starting to do that. But I mean, I'm single. I don't have kids. I don't have a husband or boyfriend or anything, and I was able to do it and just rent out rooms. And so, like, my biggest thing is, why am I going to pay rent when it's just throwing away money, or like when I can put it towards something that's going to benefit me? And I think a lot of the times people just don't think long term, unfortunately. And so, and people, a lot of times it's kids, just like I was like joining right at 18. And so they don't have the life experience, they don't have the foresight to think of what's going to happen with my finances in 5 to 10 years. Whether or not I stay in the military, that's just not something that's really talked about enough, I think. And so, yeah, and it's just like, I think once people start realizing that you can do it, I'm starting to see it more now with some friends that, once they realize it is that easy, they're starting to do it a little bit more. But I also think it's just the commitment issues of young people is the big
Yeah.
thing, and so they just don't have the foresight.
Yeah. And the beauty of it is, I think, and I deal with it a lot too. And I talk to people, there is that commitment issue, and there's a little bit of fear also, of
Mhm.
when am I and where am I going to get stationed next? So how long am I going to be in this location, and then where am I going next, and does it make any sense to buy here if I'm going to leave in 2 or 3 years? And there's all that going on. But the reality is, most areas where there's a military base, there's usually a pretty good demand for housing, even off base. And so the opportunity to turn that home into a rental when you get PCS somewhere else is really, really likely, and it can usually cover the mortgage anyways. So it's something that can be a long-term asset for you. And there's no better way to buy real estate all over the country than when you're getting forced to move there for your job, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about just maybe some advice and experience that you could share with other women who may be contemplating going into the military, or maybe you're in the military now. Obviously, being a woman in the Navy has probably a different perspective than being a man in the Navy, right? So what things would you tell our audience, especially the women that are listening, that would be some good advice or some sage advice for them that are considering joining the military?
Considering joining the military, I would just question what is your motivation for joining, and make sure that you are ready for a completely different lifestyle, completely different mindset. As great as the military is starting to open up to being gender neutral, it still is very much a male dominated profession, and it shows in a lot of areas. And so I would just question, one thing I would consider before joining is, are you okay with authority? Are you okay with being around guys all the time? Are you okay with kind of giving up your feminine ways for a while? Because most of the time, wear makeup, do your hair has to be up in a bun. It's just a different lifestyle than a civilian woman. So you do have to give up a decent amount of your feminine essence in order to be in the military. And then besides that, even once a woman decides to join, I would just recommend keeping with your self-respect, keeping with your values, your morals, and just really stay grounded in who you are as a person. But I say that for men and women, but most specifically with women, because they do get kind of roughed around a bit more than guys, kind of tested a bit more. And so just really to stay grounded with who you are as a person, and just know if you make it through, you'll be a stronger individual because of it.
Right. And then there's always, all the benefits that you receive from having been in the military.
Oh,
also,
absolutely.
Which are phenomenal. I mean, being in the military isn't necessarily easy, but the perks and the benefits are really, really good. I mean, our country does a good job of taking care of veterans and always providing something to thank them for their service. So there's always that outlook on it as well. So now you're transitioning to the next phase, right? So tell us a little bit about that. You're headed to go to school up in Idaho, right?
Yeah.
And tell us, what are you planning on studying, and what's the career trajectory for you?
Well, right now I'm going to school for environmental engineering, and I've been going already with just a grant here in California. So there's, as far as schooling goes, there's a lot of options for that. And so I've been using a California grant for school for that, but I'm going to start using my GI Bill. And so I'll be getting my school paid for plus housing. And so I'll be in Idaho for the rest of my generals for that, so probably another year. And then after that, I'll probably be moving to Switzerland to finish out my university. Because one thing a lot of people don't realize is that with the GI Bill, it's not just in the US, it's worldwide, and they still pay for housing allowance, they still pay for tuition and for everything that they do here in the States, but you can do it anywhere in the world. So it makes living overseas for a year or two a very real possibility. Plus, visas are a lot easier to get for students. as well. So that's kind of another opportunity that a lot of veterans don't take advantage of, especially for the young single ones.
Wow. That's a super cool takeaway. I had no idea on the GI Bill that you could use it for schools that were overseas. So that's, I mean, for anybody listening that hasn't used their GI Bill yet or is planning to use it when they get out, that's really, really cool. Because I know in Europe and other places, there's some really amazing, you know, business schools and culinary schools, engineering schools, and not to say they're any better than what you might find stateside, but just that whole experience, right, of living in Switzerland as an example and being able to go to school there and just have that life experience is super, super cool. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's really awesome. And how long do you expect to be in Switzerland for wrapping up your studies?
Probably another 2 years. It kind of depends on exactly which school I choose and like the credit transfers. But like it probably won't be more than 2 years unless I choose to continue with my master's overseas, or if I come back here. But another thing I want to mention about the GI Bill in overseas, or even schools here, but they have a list of all of approved schools already, like pre-approved around the world, like on like the website for the GI Bill. But even if your school isn't listed there, you can still apply. You can apply for them to be approved. And so with that in mind, like there's kind of everything's on the table. There's kind of like a limitless opportunity there. So that's kind of something that I like. I'm kind of searching for now. I haven't narrowed down my school yet, but I have about 4 or 5 options that I'm like talking to right now. So
very cool. I love that. That's really a neat story. Well, Rebecca, I just wanted to thank you for carving out a little time. I know you're super busy and focused on the next chapter, but I wanted to thank you for carving out some time for us to be on Armed and Ready and share your experiences with us and being, you know, a woman in the military who is now transitioning to the next phase in life. I think your story hits home with a lot of people and a lot of women that are in the military or considering it. So I really appreciate you spending time with us today. And for all of our listeners out there, we thank you for stopping by today on our podcast. You know, there's an interesting time we're in with the coronavirus hitting and, you know, some of the fear and stuff that's out there. So if you're self-quarantined or at home, we appreciate you taking some time to check out our podcast today. And of course, if you have any questions or would like to reach out to us about anything we talked about, you can always reach me at valoanguy.us. And we thank you so much for stopping by.